My name is Jacob Benitez, and I'm going to be going over my reimagination of Northwestern's University Library, and it's going to be using my incredibly fancy 3D modeling software, Minecraft here, which I love for a very particular reason, and that is that each one of these blocks is 1 meter by 1 meter, or at least that's what it would represent in real life, which makes scaling things that exist in real life actually fairly easy as long as you have the original blueprints. And so after doing some archive digging, and all the files are going to be attached on the web page that this video is linked to, I was able to recreate main library's outline and pretty much the essential parts of all of its floor plans. And so what you're going to see here is the floor plans for the basement level, the basement and first level combined, and then the basement first and second level combined as three different models, just so that way you could it's easier to like vision from above like what each plan would look like and what each space is designated for. So what's going to be immediately apparent are two things. Number one is the color coding that is assigned to each different region, each different space, which I will go over momentarily. And then the other thing that's going to be pretty clear right away is that main library is not white. Definitely not even close to a shade of bright white as bright as this, which I will admit is the only discrepancy with using Minecraft, is that it's incredibly difficult to recreate the outside color and the inside color in an accurate manner, because already this like implies that each of the walls are 1 meter thick, and that isn't the case for most of the structure in real life. And so I would have to add another shell to the outside to like color correct it. And so instead I just chose to prioritize the inside color scheme over the outside one. So you're just going to have to imagine for me that most of it is the concrete color that actually appears in real life. So all the adjustments that were made to the original floor plan were basically done to address requests by students that I spoke with over the past week or so. And so most of it was informal questioning. And a lot of the complaints about main library actually came up being like incredibly similar. And so one of the biggest ones that you'll see that influences a lot of what's built throughout is the lack of student study spaces, whether that be like collaborative or individual throughout main library, because main library is enormous. Like anybody who visits it understands just how absurdly massive the structure is. And yet for all that space, most people just prefer making the trek up to mud in favor of that, because the student spaces are just of greater quality and quantity than main. And that's kind of a problem when main library is supposed to be representing the structure that's in the center of campus, that is supposed to be like a hub for people to be walking through. And so a lot of what's redesigned here is kind of to remedy that. And yeah, without further ado, we'll get started into the specific floor plans. One of the things to know for the basement plan is that it actually has the least space designated for it on the original plans, because the south and the east towers are actually not excavated. And so instead of kind of cheating and giving myself more space to be working with than the original plans called for, I'm not going to suggest excavating that, because I'm not even sure if that's like possible with stuff built on top of it already, and so I'm not going to make that suggestion. But what we do see here is the color coding that we have to address. So orange is going to be all the storage space. Evidently, there's a lot of things to be storing in this building that aren't necessarily for the public, like all the book collections. And so whatever that happens to be, we have plenty of space allocated for it, just like we did in the original plans. Red is going to be for mechanical rooms and other maintenance related areas. Yellow is going to be for electrical and the elevator shafts, which we see right here and right here. And those are going to run all the way up through the 5 floors, even though we only go to the second one. And I'll explain that later on as well. Green is going to be the study spaces, and what we're going to see here is that there are two different shades of green. Lime green is for all students, and then dark green is going to be specifically reserved for graduate students. And then blue is going to be our bathrooms. And so what we're going to see here is, if you look on the web page that I was talking about earlier, you're going to see that the blueprint for the basement plan is not at all similar to what the original plan was. The only thing that resembles the original plan is kind of this region right here where there's the stairwell and then the two elevator shafts, and then the rest of it is kind of just reinterpreted based off of what's intuitive to go through as a student and also what makes sense. And so one of the immediate requests was study spaces. So with study spaces, you're gonna, I asked many of the students like what specifically about the study spaces was important to them, and it basically came down to lighting and aesthetics because libraries today aren't traditionally used the way that they were, and so in the past, a more important aspect of it was, I guess, to appear like ultra modern, but not too far into the past. I just mean like more recently, like when Walter Nesch was designing Main Library, many of the spaces were super modern, at the forefront of technology. But now people actually kind of appreciate the older aesthetics, like we see at Deering, which is why it's a much more popular space when it's actually open. And so, ignoring most of this central area for the moment, we have a new designed library area that sort of mimics some of the aesthetics of Deering Library. It just allows for more storage of books, and primarily it is an aesthetic space, like first and foremost, which I believe is important because that's quite literally what students are asking for. I mean, it sounds silly on one hand, but the very core of the university's like what it should be striving to do is to satisfy the students. And so we address two problems here: the aesthetics of main library, which are kind of revised here by leaning more towards what Deering would appear like, and student spaces, both individual student spaces, lots of chairs down here, and group student spaces with a couple of tables up on the top here being for group work. And so I've ensured to isolate the two different levels so that the sound wouldn't travel down to where most of the single student spaces are, which is why this is kind of like a tiered structure right here. I'm sure there are other ways to accomplish this, but I do also think that it contributes to the aesthetics. So, you're knocking out two birds with one stone here. So then moving down the tunnel, we are going to be entering the back end, which is almost where the student spaces sort of end because past this point is going to be towards the hallways leading to storage, mechanical, and electrical rooms, which isn't going to be really for student access because there's not much back there that you would ever need to. But we have graduate student space right here. We have a little space kind of mimicking how we have plenty of graduate student space on the upper floors of Maine currently. And obviously that is another important population to be considering when redesigning. So we have our elevator shafts right here on the hallway, and then we have a very simple room right here with everything clearly labeled. Again, this hallway would wrap around the back on the other side for employees that need to be back there. We have another mechanical room right here. We have sort of like a directory right here showing like where each thing is. And then we have a men and women bathroom, super easy to find, super convenient. And what's nice about this is that this exact bathroom space and central area between the elevator shafts and the stairwell is mimicked on the next floor above. And so we keep consistent, which addresses another problem that was given to University Library by many of the people that I interviewed, which was that it's wildly inconsistent and it is incredibly difficult to navigate. And so if we enter down through the same area through the stairwell, you're going to find that it opens up into an incredibly similar space with one long hallway that's easy to follow based on the carpeted paths. And more importantly, a men and women's restroom right here, conveniently located on the first floor so that people don't have to go downstairs if they want to go to the bathroom, which seems a little bit nitpicky, but it might have honestly been the response that came up the most when I was asking for suggested revisions. So, other than that, on the first floor, we have plenty more to look at. This is arguably the floor that has seen the greatest change, and it mostly comes down to study spaces. And also paintings. I would like to point out that all of the walls are pretty much lined with paintings, and I envision this either being through paintings that the university acquires, like via art collections and auctions, or student paintings, which you'll see further down that way in a little bit. But I just think it livens up the place. I think that University Library, as it is, has a lot of empty faced walls, and I don't know, it's just kind of unattractive. That's a personal suggestion that I believe. I think it will lead to more people wanting to spend more time looking at each individual part of the library as opposed to rushing through to the next spot. And it's just another thing to draw more people in because for as big as University Library is, it can be awfully empty some days, and that just it's not good vibes. And again, aesthetics and the way the library looks to a lot of people is incredibly important. So we have more storage over here, and then the east tower is going to be in this direction. It's super easy to get to from the library, or sorry, from the elevator shafts and the stairwell. And what we are going to be met with here on the east first floor is going to be a wildly different layout. than what is actually currently in place here. And it's mostly to maximize the amount of study spaces. So if we enter into here, you're immediately met with books in two different directions to go into. You just follow the carpet. And the outer ring of this floor is going to have an absurd amount of single study spaces, like more than the students could ever ask for, so that we can actually satisfy the needs of the thousands of students that are on this campus and offer them a place that they could want to go to study as opposed to choosing their dorms or all crowding into mud library. So it's the same thing wraps all around. And then from each of the four wall directions, you will see that there are racks of books. And so we're still keeping functional library bookshelves all throughout the space, and we're kind of maximizing the amount of books that we can fit on each floor so that we don't have to reallocate any of them to spaces that don't actually exist. Another welcome addition that is not currently here is a stairwell, a spiral stairwell that is going to be following all the way up through each of the wings. And this is also by request because only having one stairwell that goes up through the entire building, or I guess technically the original plan calls for two different stairwells, but in the same area, they're just kind of like split off. It's kind of an inconvenience because if you wanted to get from this floor to the one directly above it, you would have to go all the way back into the middle area, go up the stairs, and then come back over here, which is a waste of time. And yeah, the last addition that I also wanted to mention was the better usage of windows. And so main library has plenty of windows, and even though most of them are narrow, a lot of them don't really have much going on behind them as far as students being able to like look outside. And I am a firm believer, along with many of the other people that I interviewed, that lighting is important. It's incredibly important. And being able to look outside, it doesn't feel as claustrophobic or constricting as many of the spaces that do currently exist do. And so, with each of these seats having a window view, or at the very least, like amazing lighting, I just think it's a more comfortable environment to be studying in. It's better to not be feeling claustrophobic. And I think that also has, even if only slight, like a better impact on the psyche of students who are going to be studying in this space. So again, what the addition that is arguably the most important here is the men and women bathroom here on this floor. And once we go past in the other direction here, we're gonna have another mechanical room and then NUIT. So for all computer troubleshooting problems or any issues, because this is currently a region that exists in the library, but it is not in this spot particularly. So it's just been placed here to keep with the symmetry, which we'll be discussing in just a moment. So if you come over in this direction, just for reference of where we're at, the lantern where we enter the library is going to be in the same space. So this space right here comes down, and then instead of opening up into this big long hallway with services on the right side and the computer lab that's opened up on the left, we actually have an enclosed computer lab right here, which I'll get to in just a moment, and a lounge area right here, which is sort of inviting students to kind of like gather here, because right now in main library, there's not really any point in gathering. There's no spaces to be conversating and having like open discussions and talking to fellow peers, and it's just not a super welcoming environment. It kind of just feels like you're there to grind away at studying, and that's not the entire point of the space. So if we come into the South Tower, this is addressing another main complaint, which is the cafe. Now, most people had positive reviews of the food itself from the cafe. Most people. The only issue is that it doesn't really do a great job at harnessing a social kind of energy. Like it's not it isn't a problem of aesthetics as much as it's just not a space that's known for attracting a lot of people. And so the whole point of putting this many desks and areas in here is that this would be sort of a more premier version of the cafe that would attract more students here, again with plenty of window seating and areas to sit together in groups and to chat, or if you prefer like studying in like a kind of busier environment that simulates like a coffee shop, you would have that here. And then in the center, in the core, we would have like the kitchen where the actual food and coffee and drinks and whatnot is being made, with plenty of menus above. And so that wraps up the South Tower. And then coming over here to the computer lab, we have an enclosed space, which I also think is better for the people working inside the computer lab, because that's generally one of the spaces that isn't as collaborative. And so you would keep it away from like most of the noise happening out here, which I think would be an improvement as far as how efficient the students are being able to work in there. We'd have a printer region right here, and then we would have plenty of computers lined up right here with windows at the end again for plenty of lighting. And then over here is actually a new addition, which is a 3D printing lab, which many universities around the United States actually have. And Northwestern's kind of lacking here because our library doesn't really have one. And so this would be a nice little feature to add. I know the school has the money for it. I just know. So then coming back out here past the computer lab, we can wrap around towards the region that currently goes to Deering, and we would have two different options. You could go to Deering South down that hallway and Deering North down that hallway. Obviously, I didn't actually build Deering, but out here is where the sort of outdoor area is with some of the landscaping, and then Deering would be like right out there in front. And then we have another little lounge area right here and a conference room right here. So for any staff meetings, or I guess it could be a student space too, arguably, just depends on if you need to like rent it out or whatever the situation may be. And then that basically brings us to the last feature of, or last two big things about the first floor. We have some study spaces over here that kind of mimic what we have in tech, which are very popular from what I've personally observed. And one of my favorite additions is what I would call the Wildcat Works. And so I know we have plenty of great artists on campus, and I think that it's important to sort of display their works because A, it adds color to what could otherwise be a pretty soulless kind of structure, and B, it's just appreciating like how much talent they have to offer. And I'm sure that we could get some incredible pieces of work going on here. And we have a secondary wall over here for precisely the same thing, just so that we have extra space. We have like security desk over here, which I believe currently exists on the first floor in Maine. And then we also have circulation, which is important because people lose things all the time. Except this is more of a consolidated space because of how much extra storage there is. This would kind of suck in some of the other circulation. It would like consolidate some of the other circulation areas that we have on campus and some of the other buildings like tech. And after a while, it would kind of all just come here. And then if it still doesn't get picked up from this centralized location, then it could get donated to wherever it currently goes. And then that brings us here onto the collaborative space in the North Tower, which is designed so that there are separate collaborative rooms so that the environment isn't overly noisy and still able to allow and facilitate for group work with like TVs in each room that can show for presentations. We have hallways that go up on the side, and then in the middle we have like a space showing like a bunch of whatever, it'd be like artworks, paintings, potteries, just anything interesting that either the students have to offer or that the school has on hand from any art collections, just to kind of give the space a little bit of like a unique charm. And then, yeah, each of these spaces would come equipped with desks of varying sizes, a various amount of chairs to accommodate for bigger and smaller groups, window spots, and plenty of other attractive features that I just really believe would do a better job at facilitating group work. And especially for projects, because right now there are not that many spaces around campus to be working on projects collaboratively without either having too much noise going on in the environment or not being like a just not being as effective as those would be. And so with that being done, we can actually proceed on to the final floor, which is the second floor plan, which is going to be on the separate structure over here. And we are going to be finding one of the more drastic changes as well, and also notably one of two changes made to the actual exterior of the building, and it's going to be a change to the plaza. And so currently the plaza sits here as a huge concrete space, similar composition to this, with two planters about right here and right here, but they're smaller and they also don't have any trees in them. So they're very small, and the shrubs that are inside are kind of sad. And green space was also one of the requests made by a student, which I actually agreed with because I think that green is good for the eyes, as the old adage goes, and it's important to actually have some green here because the main library is surrounded by trees, which would be all around the area. And then there's just a barren landscape right here, which I suppose is of much more use when plazas were more in fashion when Netsch designed the structure, but currently green spaces with benches would do a much better job at servicing the students and what they need, at least when it's not freezing cold outside. And then one of the other adjustments that was made outside was this, which to the untrained eye looks identical to what it is in real life, but this structure right here actually doesn't exist. These pillars go up into where the next three floors would be, but in this space right here, it is more concrete plaza with a small ring of glass in the center that doesn't have anything inside or allow for any connectivity between the floors, which is only going to be changed for this east structure over here. But for the north structure as well, there is basically just the floor below, but copied the exact same way. And so if we could punch through down here, we would see the exact same one on the first floor, but on the second floor, just because more study spaces are important. And so we would have even more spaces for group work, which obviously are important. And these doors are crucial because second to the bathrooms on the first floor, the next biggest complaint was that going through main library, you get forced through the lantern every time. So if you're coming from way in the east and you come up these stairs, there are no convenient spots to enter anywhere except for through the lantern. So hypothetically, if you came from the east and you wanted to go to the third floor on the north tower, you would have to go all the way over here to the main lantern, over to where the stairs are in the main core tower, up the stairs until you get to the third floor or up the elevator, and then back over here through the bridge, which would extend obviously for the next three floors to get here, which is a huge waste of time when you could just enter the building through here, which is the renovated central tower. Now, because we don't need space for a cafe anymore, we can actually use it to go up to the different floors much more easily in a very centralized location that actually makes sense because the elevator wells are all right here that go all the way down to the basement. The stairwell does the exact same thing, and now you can imagine yourself coming into this structure, little study spaces, because why not? We have the space for it. You get off the stairwell, you could come around, you could go outside if you need to, because conveniently located doors right here that don't exist. You could come outside this way too, which also are conveniently doors that don't exist right now. And we have the next stairwell. Now we have ramp for accessibility in case there's any wheelchairs, which is super important, and a stairway up to the bridge level. Terrific. We have everything that you need to go between the floors all in one convenient spot and plenty of access points to it. So that is super important. And then I just wanted to go ahead and look at the East Tower again, which is for single student spaces, and just kind of get a better view of what the spiral staircase would look like in the middle. So we could just go down, and then we are on the first floor, which is identical to the second floor in that there are bookshelves on all of the sides, and then a ton of individual student spaces on the outside ring. Which brings us to the South Tower. The South Tower also has convenient doors, but because we don't need a second cafe, we are actually going to be designating it as Northwestern office spaces. And so for any employees, we have extra spaces for the offices that, they each have their own. Some of them are nicer than others, but I guess that's the case like currently as well. So that's okay. And if we come down again, more paintings just to liven things up. Again, they could be students or art collections. Doesn't matter. Just add some splashes of color. And then, we have like more, just everything offices in here. This is probably the most corporate space of it, but again, it's not really supposed to be for the students on this one. And that's okay as long as most of the spaces are. And it's also okay because currently, again, this space doesn't even exist. And so it's okay to be using it for all kinds of varied purposes. So we have more single student spaces, multi-student spaces, and faculty stuff. And then, yeah, the lantern completely unchanged. The lantern's fine. I think the only complaint people have about the lantern is the fact that you're forced to go through it, which is kind of a pain. And then again, this would bring you to an identical copy of what we had visualized over there on the first floor plan. So apart from that, one of the only other things to go over is the purple color coding, which I'm designating as Northwestern spaces. And so obviously this isn't for students, it's for faculty, so it's purple. The lantern isn't really a student space as much as it is just an entrance to the library. The central tower, I wouldn't call it a student space. When I think of student space, I think of like studying spaces, and so those are the only ones that are going to be highlighted in green. And then again, if we come over here to look, it is also just going to be like purple for the cafe because, it's not a study space as much as those are. And then, purple for the computer lab since it's all Northwestern related and owned electronics. And so here we have it, the 3 floor plans. This project mostly boils down to how important I think it is for the school to be using this plot of land effectively because even in Minecraft, you can see like on the 1-to-1 scale, this is a huge structure. Like it is by no means small or efficient in its current day form, and I think that this does a lot to kind of rectify that and allow for it to carry out its various functions better. I do sincerely believe that with all these additional spaces that were added, it would attract more students, which again, super important if we're going to be using up this much land to be having people want to come here because currently it's kind of in this awkward middle ground where mud has better study spaces and Deering has better aesthetics. And if we just combine a little bit of the two of them to get much more revitalized version of Maine that we have right now, I think that it can become what it was supposed to be, which is a centralized Maine library. It's called Maine for a reason, and yet it's arguably the least popular of the three choices. And again, I really do think that if some of these renovations were made hypothetically, it could do a better job at using the space that it's on and making people happy. You know, I mean, these suggestions were directly crowdsourced by students that I talked with, and so it's not like these are just personal beliefs. I mean, a lot of it stems off of what I believe makes a space better, which is that it's intuitive to follow. I mean, some of the layouts are much more easy to go through than how it actually is in real life right now. And so there's that, but there's also the fact that all of these suggestions were taken by people, you know, whether it be the green spaces, the bathrooms on the first floor, um, and plenty else, like lots of other features. So that pretty much wraps it up. There's gonna be a lot of links to the original blueprints listed on the webpage that this link came from. And so if you want to compare, we have like a final kind of still shot right here. You can see the floor plan on each of these pretty wildly different usages of space, but I do think they're more effective at accomplishing what they're supposed to. And so, with that, thank you so much, and that's all.